I want to talk about writing and tarot cards. Now, this I don't think will be anything new to anyone especially, but it's of interest to me. The way that both tarot and fiction are about narrative. They're about characters and plot and threads. And the way in which reading tarot is telling a story for someone about their past, about their conflicts right now, maybe making suggestions for their future. Actually, we're about to come up to National Novel Writing Month 2018, and we actually, in our little starter packs from the MLs, we received each a tarot card for ourselves. This wasn't meant to kind of predict our future. This was meant to give us ideas for what we'd be writing this month. Again, characters, events. And this was really interesting for me. So I got the world. And although it was not meant to predict my future, I kind of drew it and thought that's a very good card to get. The world representing kind of cosmic balance, everything being the way it should be, everything falling into place. That was a really nice thing to see. And I wonder whether that will become the end of my story. I think the world often could represent the end of people's stories, the ways in which all the conflicts are laid to rest, all of the hard work has come to fruition, everyone has finally ended up slotted into their role and location where they're meant to be. But I don't feel like my books usually end up that way. I'm not so much a writer of the bittersweet, or definitely not the kind of horrible endings, but I don't tie things up in that way. So that was interesting for me to see. But more generally, speaking of tarot, to get away from this specific card, I've been learning a lot of tarot this year. It's been really interesting and quite powerful to me as someone who had never really considered tarot as a worthwhile pursuit. Doing spreads for myself and for my partner every evening has helped me to prepare for the next day. It's a very mindful exercise, just thinking about what I want to happen, what I'm worried about, and the way in which, because tarots are completely random, how you'll get them, it kind of forces you to accept the ways in which things do fail. So it's interesting the way in which it relates to characters. I think people see this the most often. There's a section of the minor arcana called the court deck, where you have the kings of cups and the queens of wands and pages and knights. And nowadays we tend to read those as the way we would read any other card. Omens, portents, this represents this. But in the olden days, they were used as people. They would represent people. And you would often choose the card that looked most like you and kind of do your reading with that card as kind of a focus. So my partner and I have both chosen our cards. I'm the Knight of Cups, which is a character that represents, can represent quite a lot of creativity. He's kind of more of a poet type figure. And that seemed good to me. It can be a bit foolhardy. That also sounds good to me. And the ways in which those are people is very interesting. So it comes with this collection of characters, people that will come in and out of the story and have an effect on how it's told. We have the rest of the minor arcana, which is the 1s to 10s of wands, cups, swords, and pentacles, representing kind of more events and emotional moments, And even within each of their suits, the journeys from 1 to 10 are a story in themselves. There's a progression that is very fascinating to learn about. And then, of course, there's the big players, the major arcana, Death, the Hierophant, the Oracle, the World, the Sun, all of them. And so these are the large omens, the huge signifiers, and they're very exciting to get. And what's interesting is the ways in which they are never quite what you think. If you get the devil reversed, it represents freedom from kind of inner demons and horrible things. Death doesn't represent necessarily death, but also just a sudden change, an end, often for the better. The lovers don't necessarily represent a new romance or something like that. They can also represent a choice, following your heart. And so with them, we have this kind of dual connection between often character and destiny, which I find absolutely fascinating. And I wonder whether that's what's drawn me to them so powerfully, is the way in which you can use them to kind of draw a narrative for your life, for your questions, for the things that you care about. And I feel like the things that I've learned from them are going to help me with my writing. I love the complexity of each answer and how a good reader determines that those cards mean something different depending on the question asked, and depending on their location in the shape of the spread, and depending on what other cards are drawn. There's so much nuance in how you read them. And I really think I want that kind of nuance in what I write. I want people to read something and it be meaningful to them in the moment, but then have other meaning, have more complexity depending on whether you know what's happened next, if this is a reread, depending on what other characters have said. There can be like a dual meaning in what has just happened. I want there to be omens and portents and foreshadowing and a sense of destiny about the stories I tell, without relying on things like prophecies or I don't want to browbeat people with it. I just want it to feel ominous, but in a good way. So those are some of my thoughts on writing in tarot. I do encourage you to get a tarot deck if you're interested and learn them. Memorizing them didn't take me as long as I thought. My partner had a really good system he was teaching me. But it definitely the most difficult part is learning to read them confidently and with complexity. And I guess that's not that dissimilar to writing. You learn the rules, and then you learn how to really use them. Anyway, it's good to be back, and thank you for listening.